What's that you say? Speak up a bit, I can't hear you. Did you know that the average person in the UK waits over 10 years before seeking help for hearing loss? And that during those 10 years, their brain is quietly and measurably changing. If you've found yourself turning up the TV a bit louder than normal, or asking people to repeat themselves, or more concerningly, actually avoiding engaging in conversations and withdrawing, well, it's worth you listening through to this podcast. Some interesting information here. So welcome again to Peace Unplugged. Today I'm looking at a very underestimated wellness crisis, and that is hearing loss. We're going to look at the advice that's available in the UK is so confusing. And we're also going to look at new technology that's available to help people with hearing loss. Here's a fact that surprises almost everyone. Hearing loss is the third most common complaint in the UK, and that comes after arthritis and heart disease. According to the RNID, there's around 12 million people in the UK that are living with some degree of hearing loss. And I'll include myself in that, as I do suffer with a touch of tinnitus. The truth is the majority of those 12 million people are not wearing hearing aids. They're not receiving treatment, and in a lot of cases, they're not even seeking help. For most people, hearing loss creeps in gradually. It begins with missing the odd word, then it becomes straining to listen, especially in crowded areas like restaurants. And then we find ourselves just nodding along to conversations, not really wanting to indicate that you can't hear what's going on. By the time most people actually go to seek help for their hearing, there's an average of about 10 years has passed. That's according to the RNID report in 2023. The consequences of hearing loss are not just inconvenient, they're also neurological. A landmark study by Professor Frank Ling at Johns Hopkins University followed 639 adults over nearly 2 decades and found that mild hearing loss doubles the risk of dementia. Moderate hearing loss triples it. Severe hearing loss increases the risk 5-fold. These are not just marginal issues. They are the strongest risk factors, and those risk factors relate to our mental health. The mechanism of hearing loss is not really well understood. When our hearing is understimulated, the brain's receiving degraded signals. The brain process begins to reorganize itself, and it allocates far more resources in trying to listen and trying to hear. And that leaves less capacity for memory, also for attention, and just general functioning. It's like our brains running on empty just to hold a conversation. It's known that untreated hearing loss has a link to depression. It can certainly make a person socially isolated and bring on all sorts of anxieties. That can also result in reduced physical activity. It's not just hearing loss on its own. It's a whole body wellness emergency that's going on. Hearing loss is the single most modifiable risk factor for dementia. That's according to the Lancet Commission on Dementia Prevention, dated 2020. Addressing one's hearing loss is not vanity, it's not extravagance, and neither is it optional. It is actually one of the most meaningful investments we can make for our long-term brain health. So it may be that you've noticed the signs. You find yourself struggling to hear, so you decide to do something about it. There's a number of people that I know with some significant hearing loss. I recently joined a community group that's trying to learn some sign language just to try and assist with this. What I also discovered, and also through some research, is that there are 3 main routes into addressing hearing loss. There's your GP, there's an NHS audiology department, or you can go private. You might well see on the TV, on adverts, there's plenty of private companies advertising. You might also find those in newspapers or magazine articles. Now, logic tells us that those 3 different routes should be really a joined up situation. Unfortunately, they're not. The reality is fragmented and sometimes contradictory. It effectively leaves us confused. It can include delays, and that can be very damaging. So we need to look at ways to try and navigate it. Let's start with a GP. In theory, our GP is the gateway through to all sorts of healthcare, and that includes audiology. But you have to remember that you're seeing a GP is a general practitioner. So we know that in the UK, in practice, the average appointment lasts no more than 9.2 minutes. That's according to the BMA 2022. And hearing loss, gradual and subjective and classed as non-urgent on a triage scale, well, it's frequently deprioritised. It's thought that many GPs don't have the full training, that is specialist training in audiology assessments. A 2019 survey by the RNID found that over a third of people with hearing loss felt their GP did not take their concerns seriously on the first presentation. Now, the NHS auditory pathway, once you get access to it, it offers some genuine value. You'll get NICE, that is NICE approved hearing aids, and that'll include some professional fitting along with some aftercare, and that is all free at the point of use. The trouble is that pathway is chronically under-resourced. Waiting time UK have significantly extended. In some areas, you've got to wait 18 to 24 months. That's from NHS England referral to treatment data 2023. During that time, hearing loss goes unchecked. So what are we left with? There's the commercial area. That's all those private hearing companies. Big companies like Specsavers Hearing or Boots, and a company called Hidden Hearing. And there's also independent audiologists. That private market is reckoned to be worth 500 million annually. The advertising for that is quite sophisticated, and it does touch on people's emotions, but it's not regulated in the same way for clinical governance, such that you'll find in the NHS. Private companies will obviously advertise what are the really nice aesthetics around the technology, but there's less of a discussion around clinical need, particularly for the individual. The result is that we as patients receive 3 different levels. That's 3 different messages from different sources, and none of them acknowledge each other. The NHS offers clinical rigour, but then it's poor accessibility. GPs offer access, but with insufficient expertise. Commercial providers offer that choice and also some speed, but they operate within a market incentive. No single pathway coordinates. All 3 of those pathways leave us as patients sitting in the middle. Now, understanding all of this can be empowering for us. It allows us to be a little bit strategic. We can be informed on what is available. We don't have to necessarily sit passively and accept the advice of the first place that we go and visit. We can explore the options that are available. There's a section at the end of this podcast which will explain it in more detail. Now, if you picture a hearing aid, you might think of a large beige-coloured block on the end of an ear, something that was provided to previous generations, something that would whistle loudly in quiet rooms. But modern technology has changed this beyond recognition. The modern hearing aids are much more sophisticated. They're like kind of wearable computers these days. That means they're programmable and they're adaptive. That's certainly the case at the premium end. These days they look little more than earbuds, but not all hearing aids are created equal. There's a big gap between what the NHS provides and what the private sector offers. So let's break down this technology, shall we? Let's look at why Bluetooth and Wi-Fi connectivity are not available in all kinds of devices. So the information I've discovered here is that NHS hearing aids in England are predominantly standard receiver in-canal models, sourced through centralised NHS procurement contracts designed to balance clinical effectiveness with cost. These ones are functional and they're well fitted and they're suitable for most hearing loss profiles. There's 2 types of technology available. They don't routinely include things like Bluetooth or direct streaming capability. This is not a clinical decision. It's referred to as a procurement and budget decision. The NHS spends approximately £45 per hearing aid on procurement. That's according to NHS Supply Chain 2023. That's compared with £500 to £3,500 per device in the premium private models. Bluetooth works through a chip installed in the device, and that can communicate directly with a smartphone, also televisions, as well as other Bluetooth-enabled equipment. This allows users to stream phone calls, listen to music and media directly. It turns the hearing aid into a personal listening device. However, Bluetooth requires greater processing power, and that can mean larger batteries, which will result in having a larger device. Now, we know that through the years, technology has managed to make the chips much smaller. That started with the iPhones, and it's also available now with Android phones. So the more discrete devices now carry that kind of technology. Again, we're talking about something that's bought privately, devices that can cost around £1,500. Wi-Fi connectivity in hearing aids is beginning to emerge, but at this stage it's still limited. Rather than streaming audio directly over Wi-Fi, current Wi-Fi devices include includes a home hub linked to the broadband. This can include remote tuning by audiologists and also over-the-air software updates. And there can also be app-based controls. True direct Wi-Fi for audio streaming remains relatively rare, and that's because Wi-Fi protocols consume much more power. Bluetooth, on the other hand, is much more lower energy, so battery life is crucial. Research published in the International Journal of Audiology, NG and BART 2020, found that hearing aid users with Bluetooth connectivity reported significantly higher satisfaction, greater daily wear time, and better self-reported quality of life than those using non-connected devices. Wear time matters because a hearing aid in the drawer provides zero auditory stimulation. That audio stimulation is really essentially needed, and that's because audio deprivation continues over time. So there's a technology gap between NHS providers and the commercial private suppliers. That's not a reason to reject the NHS option. It does, however, give us the opportunity to evaluate, to have an honest conversation, to work out what is best for us as an individual. Also to consider what fits with our lifestyle, and that's linked to our cognitive health concerns. The key here is to being able to make that cognitive decision about what is best for us. That includes all the information available. There is an aspect of hearing loss that rarely appears in audio, or in fact in commercial advertisements. That is the profound effect that hearing loss has upon mental health, as well as our emotional wellness. The experience of gradual hearing loss, well, it's not simply an inconvenience. It can reshape our sense of our identity, can have an impact upon our relationships. It can even affect how we manage to work. These issues can be deeply distressing to the individual. A large-scale survey by the RNID 2023 of over 5,000 people with hearing loss in the UK found that 79% reported feeling excluded from conversations. 52% said their hearing loss had caused them to withdraw from social activities, and that's particularly things that they previously enjoyed. Half experienced reporting symptoms of depression and anxiety, and that is a direct consequence of hearing loss. This maps directly onto what audiologists and psychologists call cycle of hearing loss withdrawal. The harder it is to follow conversations, the more exhausting it becomes, and subsequently we begin to avoid those conversations and begin to withdraw. We then become isolated. Professor Piers Dawes at the University of Manchester has published extensively on the relationship between hearing loss and mental health in the UK population. His work, drawing on the UK Biobank cohort of over 100,000 participants, confirms that hearing loss is independently and significantly associated with depression, even after controlling for age, social class, and pre-existing health conditions. The mental health issue here is largely invisible. It'll often get missed by the healthcare system. So we might present to our GP with perhaps anxiety and depression, but not necessarily realise that it could be related to hearing difficulties. You see, it's not made explicit to clinicians what that link is. And let's face it, there is a stigma around hearing loss. It's usually the last thing that people want to disclose to a GP. So hearing loss is a mental health issue as well as a physical. So if you frame it as a general wellness issue rather than just a physical or mental health issue, it allows us to open up a conversation. Conversation that can be about the whole of a person. If you're experiencing anxiety, low mood, and social alongside hearing difficulties, it's not a coincidence. It's said to be physiology, and crucially, it is treatable. Now, the public at large see hearing loss as mainly an issue for the elderly. The vision of an older person with a bulky hearing aid, it's looked at as like a slight inconvenience of age. But that image is actually inaccurate, and it can be harmful. It takes away the fact that hearing loss is experienced by people of all ages, including children. In the UK, newborn hearing screening, the Newborn Hearing Screening Programme, is one of the NHS's genuine success stories, identifying around 1,200 babies with significant hearing loss each year. That's NHS England 2022. Early identification and intervention in infancy is well evidenced to produce substantially better language, cognitive, educational outcomes. That's from Yoshinaga Itano et al. 1998, Pediatrics. However, for children of school age and for working age adults, the picture deteriorates sharply. Noise-induced hearing loss, mainly caused by recreational exposure, such as loud music, going to noisy concerts, earbuds that are worn at maximum high volume. Now that's becoming an escalating public health concern. The World Health Organization estimate that over 1 billion young people globally are at risk of noise-induced hearing loss from unsafe listening practices. That's from WHO 2019. Yet awareness, screening and preventive guidance for this group in the UK remains patchy and inconsistent. For working age adults, the barriers to seeking help are often compounded by the stigma. A 2021 YouGov survey commissioned by the RNID found that 75% of adults under 55 with hearing loss were embarrassed about it, and over half had delayed seeking help because they did not want to be perceived as old or disabled. The stigma is reinforced by the way hearing aids are marketed. That's almost certainly to the older demographic, and by the relative absence of working age role models speaking openly about their hearing loss. Meanwhile, adults in employment with unaddressed hearing loss, well, they've faced measurable economic consequences. Research from the Better Hearing Institute, that's Kochkin 2010, found that people with untreated hearing loss earned significantly less per year than hearing peers at equivalent career levels, with communication barriers in the workplace as primarily contributing factor in the UK. Equivalent data from the RNID confirms that the employment rate for people with severe hearing loss sits significantly below the national average. Hearing loss doesn't discriminate by age. It affects children's language development, depending on whether they get early support. It affects young adults. It affects their social lives and their careers. And of course, for older adults, there is the danger of cognitive decline. So a wellness framework for this, it kind of needs to be lifespan wide, not just confined to those aged 65 plus. The stigma of this issue keeps so many people away. So now let's summarise. Untreated hearing loss is both a neurological and a wellness emergency. It's got proven links to dementia, to depression, and to social isolation. Yet the average UK patient waits around about a decade before they seek help. The advice structure in the UK is fragmented. There's the GPs, the NHS audiologists, the commercial providers, and each of those options are disconnected. They offer conflicting guidance in many cases. There's no coordination there. Hearing aid technology has transformed, but it is to a certain extent constricted by the cost levels. Evidence says that patients are rarely given transparent information about this. The mental health consequences about hearing loss are very real and clinically significant, yet they're largely invisible to our healthcare system. The links are simply not explicit. Children, young adults and working age people are simply being underserved. That's because the general focus is on the older population. So here we have now some suggested solutions to address this issue. If you think you've got some hearing loss, push for an NHS audiology referral. Do that directly and persistently. Don't just accept a leaflet instead of a referral. If your GP at first doesn't make that referral, return to the GP again and make it explicit. We are actually entitled to an audiology assessment. Given the waiting times, make that request as soon as possible, ideally when you have the first awareness of these issues. It is possible that you can self-refer, but you need to check this with your local NHS trust. Now, if you're going to go down the private route, you need to do some due diligence and use some independent accreditation. Use audiologists that are registered to the Healthcare Professional Council. That's the HCPC. Looks to see if they are members of the British Academy of Audiology, the BAA. Avoid providers where they have their primary method is based on sales, particularly where that appears to be high pressure. A legitimate audiologist will conduct a full diagnosis. They'll make a proper assessment before they recommend a device. Ask specific questions about hearing aid technology, wherever you get it from. Ask first if it does have Bluetooth connectivity. Ask if it can stream directly from your smartphone. Is remote fine-tuning available? How long does the battery last? Can the device be updated and upgraded if my needs change? That way you're likely to get the best recommendations from the professionals. Don't be afraid to address any issues of mental health. They may well be connected. If you're getting anxiety, low mood, or depression, or isolating, and you've also got hearing loss, then that is a key issue. State this to your GP as well as your audiologist. Ask for an integrated approach. Charities including the RNID, the Hearing Link organisation offer peer support programs, counselling referrals and community connection specifically for people navigating hearing loss and its emotional consequences. Protect the hearing you have starting today. Noise-induced hearing loss is irreversible, but it is preventable. The World Health Organization recommends keeping your personal audio devices below 60% of maximum volume and limiting exposure to venues above 85 decibels to a maximum of 2 hours. Custom moulded musicians' earplugs, available from audiologists for approximately £100 to £200, offer excellent protection. That's for concerts, loud workplaces, and that is without sacrificing the quality of the sound. The best hearing aid is the one that you'll never hear. The best hearing aid is the one that you'll never need. Thank you again for listening to Peace Unplugged. I hope this helps. As always, keep well and speak to you next time. Bye for now.